field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street singing song and the carrying sign, mostly saying hooray for our side. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. Young people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children. What's that sound? Everybody look, it's going down.
Welcome back to the Robust Opposition. This is Lauren Steiner. I'm your host, and tonight this is the first Asheville edition of the Robust Opposition, and I'm going to be focusing on an issue that is near and dear to my heart, and that is climate change and the environment. And with me is the campaigner for the Beyond Coal campaign of the Sierra Club for both North and South Carolina, Will Harlan. How you doing, Will?
Thank you so much for including me on your show. Really appreciate it.
Well, I'm really happy to have you. We had a wonderful talk earlier today, and we've got a really good show, as Ed Sullivan used to say before your time, keyed up for you. But before we talk about the topic of our show, which is Duke Energy's terrible energy plan, I would just like to read your bio here. So Will Harlan is the senior campaign representative for Sierra Club and the senior editor of Blue Ridge Outdoors magazine. He has written for the National Geographic and the New York Times, and his work has appeared in Sports Illustrated, the Wall Street Journal, and on the Oprah Winfrey Show. His book, Untamed, The Wildest Woman in America, that sounds good, was a New York Times bestseller, the daily best top 10 books of the year. Well, I'm not going to list all these awards. People can read it. And you're also the founder and executive director of Forest Keeper, a nonprofit protecting public lands, and Barefoot Seeds, a nonprofit defending Indigenous rights and foodways. And you've earned a lot of awards from that, which I'm not going to read. Harlan is also one of the region's top trail runners and 5-time champion of the Mount Mitchell 40-mile challenge, a race to the top of the highest peak in the East. Wow. And that's where you were when I was calling you this morning to talk about this show. But fortunately, you still have enough energy to appear on this show to talk about the Integrated Resources Plan. Now that sounds really wonkish. So why don't you tell us, what is an Integrated Resource Plan and why should we care?
An Integrated Resource Plan, often abbreviated IRP, is essentially just a 15-year energy plan. How is Duke Energy planning to generate electricity for the next 15 years? So as wonky as it sounds, it actually affects every single person listening, because this plan will decide how much pollution they generate, whether they go big on renewables and invest in solar and wind and battery and energy efficiency, or if they continue burning a lot of coal and building a lot more fracked gas plants. That's essentially what's being decided in this plan.
Okay, now this plan is also supposed to provide clean, reliable, and affordable energy, and those were the three things that they needed to keep in mind as they were developing this plan. Before we talk about how bad it is, talk about the process by which it was developed and the amount of public input that there was, and specifically the amount of input for organizations like yours and other environmental organizations.
Sure. So every 2 years, Duke is required to submit an integrated resource plan to the state, to the North Carolina Utilities Commission. That's a 7-person board that decides a lot of questions about utilities, both water and electric utilities, and even gas utilities across the state. They're a quasi-judicial board, and Duke submits their IRP to this board. The board solicits expert testimony from any interveners, and Sierra Club is one of several interveners. And interveners can be an individual citizen, they can be an organization like Sierra Club, they can be a business like Google and Walmart, who are interveners in the Duke IRP. So there's a whole host of interveners. They submit their expert testimony, And then there will be a public hearing, which is coming up this week, which is just the public sharing their thoughts on the IRP. And then the Utilities Commission decides, reviews all of the expert testimony, and then we'll ultimately have a final decision sometime later this summer.
Now, I was on a Zoom call with a bunch of you, these organizations and individuals last week, but the bottom line was that this energy plan got a D from the coalition of groups, and it got an F from the Sierra Club itself. Why don't you tell us why this plan is so bad and maybe break it down into several components?
This plan is hundreds of pages long and not really accessible for the average everyday customer to really understand. And so we, along with several organizations across the state and the region, compiled a Duke Energy IRP report card where we kind of broke out the main themes of the resource plan and graded Duke's plan on each of those themes. And some of those themes were: how well did they meet climate goals? What kind of energy efficiency programs do they offer? How much renewable energy is in the plan? What are their plans for coal and gas? And so we graded Duke on all of these different criteria. And not surprisingly, Duke got D's and F's on just about everything. And we can explore those topics more specifically. But one reason they got such low grades is because Duke is one of the dirtiest polluting utilities in the country. They pollute more than any other utility in the country. They have the most coal burning plants in the nation. They have the most fracked gas plants planned in the country. And they have the least amount of renewable energy planned compared to their whole portfolio. So they're one of the dirtiest utilities in the country. And not surprisingly, their plans for the next 15 years are more of the same. And that's not going to meet our climate goals. That's not going to help our air and water quality. That's not going to help us achieve our renewable goals. So for a lot of reasons, Duke's energy plan fails miserably.
Well, I just came from California, where I've been working with Beyond Coal and a lot of other organizations for the last 10 years, and we've made tremendous progress. As a matter of fact, just last year, we were able to get our Los Angeles Department of Water and Power to agree to, instead of investing $6 billion into 3 aging gas plants, to instead invest in solar and battery storage. And it was a great victory, and we have very little coming from coal now. We're about to shut down the last 2 coal plants. So imagine my surprise when I get on this webinar and I see that this utility is planning on building 13 more fracked gas plants throughout the 1930s. I mean the 2030s. We're going in the opposite direction of the way we should be going.
As always, California is leading the way. And we have a long way to go here in North Carolina. Not for lack of will, the public overwhelmingly supports renewable energy. We are demanding renewable energy and a cleaner energy future, but Duke is not listening. And so that's one reason we're calling them out. And one reason we're so excited that this public hearing coming up this week has so many public participants. They've had to schedule additional public hearings. Over 200 people have now signed up. So the public is stepping up. Whether Duke will listen is another question. But so we can dive into the components of the plan. And there were 10 criteria we looked at in the report card. I'll focus on a few of the key ones. The first one, as you mentioned, coal plants. We have 6 coal plants in North Carolina, 2 of which are some of the dirtiest in the country. And they're 2 of them are right outside Metro Charlotte, affecting communities of color and low-income Black neighborhoods and people most vulnerable who are hit first and worst by legacy coal ash and coal pollution in the air and water. So Duke, in their base case scenario, wants to keep burning coal until 2049 at one of their plants. They want to keep one of their largest plants, Belews Creek, operating until 2039. There is no way we can meet our climate goals or improve the health of this state by continuing to burn coal. So the very first thing, at the very least, Duke needs to accelerate the retirement of its coal plants. They all need to be retired by 2030 at the very latest, and most of those can be accelerated. Several of them can be retired right now. Unequivocally, solar, including battery storage, solar is cheaper than coal right now in North Carolina. And as a result, coal is more expensive to burn than putting up solar panels. So we already have a cheaper, cleaner alternative. Duke is just dragging its feet because it makes money by operating coal plants. It wants to recover as much money as it can by keeping those coal plants online for as long as possible. That's how Duke makes money. And so they don't want any early closures because that means less revenue for them. The next most important factor would be gas plants and renewable energy. So if we're going to close coal plants, which we need to undeniably, what are we going to replace that with? And the answer is there's actually several things we can replace it with. First, energy efficiency is the very first step. We reduce our demand and improve the health of homes so they don't need to burn as much energy. And that is the cheapest and most effective thing to do right off. Duke has no new plans for expanding their energy efficiency programs. They actually are going to increase costs for customers and reduce what they're going to offer in terms of energy efficiency programs. So they get a very low grade there on their energy efficiency offerings. But the next logical thing for them to do is to go big on renewables. Replace this dirty, expensive coal with clean solar, wind. And instead of doing that, Duke is proposing 13 more fracked gas plants. So rather than make the shift to a clean energy future, they are doing more of the same and simply replacing coal with dirty fracked gas plants, which in some cases are even more polluting than coal.
Yes, I mean, that was something when I got involved with Beyond Coal back in 2010. I hadn't even heard of fracking, and I kind of believed the lie about natural gas. And when I first learned what fracking was in 2012, that became one of the major issues that I became an organizer against. And like you said, along with coal, it is an environmental justice issue because that's where these plants are put, let's face it, in poor, low-income communities of color. So let's go through another couple of criteria before we talk about the scenario that you think they're subtly pushing and the one that you would like to see.
Renewables is really important because Duke lags behind the entire country in renewables. Right now, customers from Duke Energy, only 6% of their energy comes from renewables. Nationally, right now, the average is 18%. And the National Renewable Energy Laboratories, NREL, which is kind of the official research agency of the country, estimates that Duke can be getting 34% of its energy through renewables in this IRP. Instead, Duke is only proposing a mere 8% increase in the renewables over the next 15 years. That's going to get us to 14% renewables. No way are we going to meet any kind of climate goals or make any real difference in the climate crisis or improve the health of our air and water with only an 8% increase in renewables. That's insulting, and it will keep Duke at the very bottom of the list in terms of renewable energy investment.
So you're saying that even their number scenario 6, which has the most renewables, is not sufficient?
Yeah, even in their best of their 6 scenarios, which we can talk about in a moment, they are not pivoting to clean energy or renewables. They are simply propping up their fossil fuel investments and going big on fracked gas investments.
Right.
They want to stay a fossil fuel company for as long as possible.
Well, I don't understand why they're doing that, because I did a show with Justin McCullough from DSmog blog 2 years ago now that talked about fracking is dead as a business. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's really based on, auctioning off these leases that they have, sort of like they did with mortgages. And the bottom is falling out. The smaller companies are going out of business. So I don't really understand why they're doubling down on this. But regardless, before we talk about the scenarios, were there any other areas where they got low grades in that you want to touch on?
Yeah, we can talk about a few more criteria in a moment, but you bring up a really important point about the failure of fracked gas already becoming apparent. Just last year, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which Duke was heavily invested in, was canceled. And the Mountain Valley Pipeline is facing serious legal challenges and is way behind schedule and way over budget. And we're already seeing fracked gas falling apart and the opposition to fracked gas rising. So it does not have a future here in North Carolina or anywhere, but companies like Duke continue to promulgate myths trying to prop up this dying industry. And this energy plan, this IRP, is the latest example where they're planning to build 13 more fracked gas plants across the state. As you mentioned, those will almost certainly land in low-income communities of color. So this is an environmental justice issue as well as a public health issue.
Yes, and I also did a show a couple of years ago. I think it was in that same show actually with Sharon Kelly, who's another reporter for DSmog blog, about fracking for plastics, because that is the next dirty thing they're going to do, and they're trying to turn the Rust Belt into the plastic belt. And it's even more harmful to human health than the current fracking that they're doing. Now, of course, capitalists are going to capitalize. We've seen that Warren Buffett made a very big bet in railroads. He bought Burlington Northern Railroads a few years ago because he could see the handwriting on the wall with all the protests against the pipeline. Even though Obama, we got him to cancel the Keystone North, a lot of people don't realize that he fast-tracked Keystone South. And you don't really see the industry squawking because they found workarounds. They knew back then when Bill McKibben and everybody was getting arrested encircling the White House, they saw the handwriting on the wall. And that's about the time Warren Buffett, through his Berkshire Hathaway, bought up Burlington Northern. And now they're talking about, I just posted an article from Justin yesterday about how they're making safer oil trains. So they're not going to be calling them bomb trains anymore. Everybody knows about the explosion when it fell off the rails in Lac-Megantic and vaporized, 96 people or something in 5 square miles of the town. A lot of people don't know that Obama actually quadrupled fracking. And with the TPP that he was pushing towards the end of his term, that would have expedited LNG export terminals. Getting back to the integrated resource plan, they have 6 scenarios. They make a big deal saying they're not favoring one of these scenarios, kind of leaving it up to the commission. But you say that they're really favoring the base scenario, and they're actually lying about the base scenario. Can you explain?
Well, what they've done is created 6 pathways, but they all are based on flawed assumptions. They've dramatically inflated the costs of batteries, for example, battery storage, to make it seem unrealistic. They've dramatically underestimated the cost of fracked gas to make it seem like it makes economic sense to build these plants when we know it doesn't. So they've twisted the numbers to reach the outcomes they want. And that's what's disingenuous about this whole plan. So they have 6 scenarios, and a couple of them are ambitious. A couple of them we would potentially like, the no new gas alternative, for example, or close all coal by 2030. Those are 2 really good scenarios. But what they've done is they've cooked the books and made the numbers, the costs of those plans, especially the no new gas plan, so outrageous and unrealistic that it's insulting and completely flawed. So our analysis and our experts will be testifying and showing how Duke has twisted the numbers to make these scenarios come out how they want them. But their base case scenario is what they've built into most of their plan. And that is one that has very little renewables and a lot more gas. And that's just not the direction that North Carolinians want to go with their energy.
Duke says that there must be a big investment in the infrastructure in both transmission for wind power and also storage. to use more of that. Now, you told me earlier that is only partially true.
Right. So there does need to be an infrastructure upgrade and transmission upgrades as we diversify our energy portfolios, as we have a more decentralized grid and we have more utility scale solar and renewables coming online. That's absolutely true. And that's true not just for North Carolina, but across the country. We're going to see more integrated grids, more sharing of energy. We've seen the failure of this in Texas recently, which is an island grid. Texas chose to kind of cut itself off from its neighbors, and we saw the catastrophic consequences of not having an integrated grid. So one thing we're pushing for in our analysis is for Duke to integrate with its neighbors and share power and resources across the region. So that's one way that transmission is going to play an important role. And yes, there will be some expenses there as we upgrade our transmission infrastructure, not nearly as much as Duke is projecting in this plan. They've outrageously inflated the numbers of those costs, primarily to keep offshore wind seemingly out of reach, when in fact, Virginia is right to the north of us, is actually using North Carolina wind for their state. They have a much more progressive energy policy.
Yeah.
And there is a North Carolina wind farm off the coast of North Carolina that will be sending its energy to Hampton Roads, Virginia, because they have the infrastructure and they have the policies in place. So North Carolina simply needs to catch up there on a policy level and a transmission infrastructure level, so we can make use of our wind energy resources. North Carolina has the best offshore wind resources of any state in the East, and that will play an important role in the coming years.
I just want to touch a little bit about nuclear, because I was very disturbed to see nuclear, specifically small-scale modular reactors, which was something that Obama's energy secretary was pushing, Ernest Moniz, who came out of the MIT Energy Initiative. A lot of people don't know that the first nuclear plants were licensed in 30 years under Obama. I got involved fighting nuclear power in 1979 with 3 Mile Island. So I still remember that. And I was part of the fight to close down the San Onofre nuclear power plant in the San Diego area. People try to say it's carbon free, which it's not. There's carbon at every stage of the process. And when they fail to discuss the cost and the fact that nobody will insure it, and when they fail to talk about the problem of nuclear waste, which is a big problem right now with these spent fuel rods in San Onofre, they're decommissioning that plant now. I have to wonder, what is the position of the Sierra Club and some of the other organizations that you work with when it comes to nuclear? Do you see that as being part of the mix?
We definitely do not support any new nuclear. And one of the 5 scenarios that Duke has put on the table is a nuclear heavy scenario where they would build what they call small modular reactors that are totally unproven. We can just look to our neighbors to the south. In South Carolina, a massive nuclear project called VC Summer was proposed. It went bankrupt. One utility completely was bought out by Dominion. Another one is still billions in debt. We see the cost, the legacy cost of nuclear right here in North Carolina. Plants that were built 20 years ago went way over cost, and now customers in North Carolina are still paying for them 20 and 30 years later. Nuclear is expensive, as you said, unreliable, dangerous, and not a part of, we don't need to be building any more nuclear facilities in North Carolina. And it's one of these things that Duke has labeled ZELFRs, which is this made up acronym, zero emissions load following resources. They've lumped a whole bunch of imaginary technology. These nuclear reactors are not proven. Neither is carbon capture and storage, another kind of wildly expensive, dreamy technology that they're relying on to try to capture coal pollution. So Duke continues to push these crazy ideas around nuclear and carbon capture and storage when we already have the solutions right here.
Right.
The simple solar panel, the simple wind turbine. They're already cost competitive. Solar is already cheaper than coal. So why are we creating these dangerous proposals around nuclear when we already have the solutions right here and now?
Because the politics often don't follow the policy. The politics follows the money.
That's
So talk about your seventh scenario, the thing that you would like to see, and then let's talk about how we influence the commission, because you're pretty sanguine about that commission. You feel it's a good commission. It was appointed by a Democratic governor.
That's right. So our seventh scenario, it's not really a new scenario. What we did is simply fix Duke's errors. And we just fixed a couple of them. There are many errors throughout the plan, but we picked two. We picked their battery costs and their energy efficiency estimates. And just by fixing the battery costs and the energy and bulking up their energy efficiency portfolio to where it was supposed to be, we were able to show that renewables are actually the cheapest option and would actually save customers $7 billion if they just used the correct numbers for solar battery storage and bulked up on energy efficiency. So just some small tweaks to the plan already bump renewables way ahead of gas, of their fracked gas plans. So that's kind of our seventh scenario, which really is just fixing their existing scenarios and the assumptions to show that what we already know, which is that renewables are the cheapest, cleanest, and best path forward.
So you're going to be presenting this on Tuesday. I was able to get in. I'm going to make a comment, not as detailed, obviously, as yours, but just where I stand on this as a new resident. And there's going to be over 200 comments made. You indicated to me that they have so many comments, they may either postpone the hearing or add more hearings. What do you think is going to be the process from here on in?
It's really exciting. This is the first time this has happened. As you pointed out at the beginning, this is kind of a wonky, complex, integrated resource plan. Who cares about that? But clearly a lot of North Carolinians do and are stepping up to the plate and making their voices heard, which is really exciting. The commission has never had to do this. They've never been deluged by so much public input. So they will likely have the hearing on Tuesday and schedule additional hearings in the next couple of weeks. So that will give even more people the opportunity to make their voices heard. And in the meantime, even if you're not registered for one of those hearings, public comments, written comments are accepted for the next month or two. So you don't have to be an energy expert to care about your air and water and your electric bills. If you want cheaper electric bills, cleaner air and water, if you want the commission to know how much you care about clean, renewable energy, this is your one and only chance. After this next window, the commission will make a decision and Duke will move forward with their energy plans. And hopefully we will have guided them toward a cleaner, renewable path.
We're out of time now, but I want to thank you very much for being on my show to talk about this very important issue. And I'd like to have you back to talk about some of the other ideas we talked about earlier today, such as community choice energy aggregation and green building codes and other things that we may need to do some work on the legislature in order to get passed. So I hope that you'll be interested in coming back again.
I would love to talk about all those topics. And thank you so much for such a thoughtful discussion.
Thank you. That was Will Harlan, who is the campaigner for the Beyond Coal campaign of the Sierra Club here in North Carolina and South Carolina. Next week, I'm going to be doing a show that focuses a little bit about foreign policy, and that is sanctions. And I'm going to be talking with two leaders from the Sanctions Kills campaign, because it's just a foreign policy tool that we use that is not very effective and is actually harmful. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank everybody for watching. This has been Lauren Steiner for the Robust Opposition. Keep fighting.